I know it sounds crazy, but the Caribbean might be more fun than Iowa.
In what universe?
Oh, by the way, Ryan, I don't know if you know Gavin Aronson.
We've chatted a little bit on Twitter, on X. I'm not going to call it X. Gross. Twitter.
I'm never going to say
Has
that.
anyone told you that you look like twins?
Me and Gavin?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the mutton chops are a bit different, obviously, but you guys...
I don't think I can grow those.
You look pretty similar. No one's ever told you that before?
I don't know. I don't think I've heard that before, but now that you say it, like, I guess we look somewhat alike.
Oh. Anyway, okay.
Well, and it's nice to meet you. I know we've talked a little bit on Twitter too, but never like chatted with our voices or anything.
I'm glad we're now chatting with our voices. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into this. This is a very, very serious episode of Rock Hard Caucus. This is our 167th. We celebrated 5 years, not long ago, and it took us this long to get to 167. If you do the math, that's not weekly, but it is now. We've been on a good streak. The current date is October 4th, as we are sitting here recording, which I think makes it, just over a month until the general election of 2024. I'm here with, I brought a guest co-host in for this. Gavin Aronson is back. Thanks for joining us, Gavin.
Yep, thanks for having me.
And Gavin has done a lot more effort preparing for this episode than I have. So, listeners, every time you hear a good question, you can credit Gavin with that.
Wait until you hear my questions. I got some silly ones.
Well, every time you hear a stupid question that sounds like a child wrote it, that was me. And this is an important episode of Rock Hard Caucus because for the first time ever, we are interviewing a candidate for U.S. House of Representatives, somebody who wants to be one of those demons running the country in Washington, D.C. We have Ryan Melton, the Democrat for Iowa's 4th District, here on the podcast today. Ryan, welcome to Rock Hard Caucus.
Glad to be here. I'm the first one. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we've never had anyone at that level. I've interviewed people in like local elections several times, but nobody who's trying to go to the big house like you.
Well, I don't want to go to jail though, but
that's what I was thinking right when I said big house. I was like, that means prison, doesn't it? But anyway.
That means prison. That's okay though. So I listened to your interview of Dexter.
Dexter Merschbrock, yes.
And I really enjoyed that one. So it's an honor to be on.
He will be thrilled to hear that you listened to the episode he was on because I
love Dexter. Yeah.
He was very excited to hear that I was interviewing you and the other person who could not make it today, who I will hopefully interview soon. So, Ryan, this is, I believe, your third attempt at this, right?
Second.
Oh, it's only the second?
Yep.
Oh, Shelton was running in 2020.
Shelton ran again,
correct.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
I'm the shorter, fatter version of J.D. Shelton. So people understandably confuse the two of us.
Do you also play baseball?
When I was a kid, I actually made I think it was called the Corn Belt All-Star Team. Nice. I think it was maybe like 5th or 6th grade. Yeah, that was the highlight of my baseball career.
Well, that sounds pretty good. The Corn Belt All-Stars?
I felt pretty good about it, yeah.
Okay, so it's your second attempt to unseat Randy Feenstra, the incumbent Republican. What is your relationship to Randy Feenstra?
There is no relationship other than I'm trying to defeat him. Ultimately, I think he's been an absentee congressman who has really been derelict in his duty of defending the people of our congressional district. And really, he spends a lot of his time taking in a lot of corporate money and defending that corporate money and those corporate interests that handle him. And we've seen the consequences of that in a wide variety of different contexts. And it's time for him to go.
When you say defending the people of your district, defending them from what?
Oh, a lot of different things. Carbon capture pipelines are arguably the biggest issue here in the 4th Congressional District. It's a bigger deal in the 4th than any of the other districts, primarily because more will be affected in the 4th than any other. But for those that are unfamiliar, essentially there's this push to lay these carbon capture pipelines to make ethanol a cleaner fuel. But to do that, you have to take a lot of people's land away. It would use massive amounts of our water in a state that we're now back into drought in most of our 99 counties. Massive amounts of water that would be used. And there's a significant public health risk. These are not natural gas pipelines. These are not oil pipelines, which certainly have their own risks. But these are...
I was about to say, you'd be okay with an oil pipeline instead.
No. But that's one thing I hear all the time is, well, I've got a natural gas pipeline through my land. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is when you talk to emergency management personnel, these carbon capture pipelines would be pushing carbon product at much higher PSI, much more volatile, and can literally asphyxiate you, like what happened in Satartia, Mississippi, in the 2020 carbon capture pipeline fracture that sent 45 people to the hospital. Randy Feenstra has taken tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars from Bruce Rastetter, who is the founder of Summit Carbon Solutions. He's essentially the godfather of these pipelines. Randy Feenstra was very public in his support of these pipelines pretty much until I announced my first campaign back in January of 2022. He actually wrote an op-ed supporting these carbon capture pipelines in, I believe, December of 2021. And I filed my paperwork with the FEC January of 2022 and ran robustly against these pipelines for the reasons I mentioned and many, many more. And he went silent on the issue pretty quickly. So I've been running against them long before most Iowans even knew what they were. But now you see poll after poll that shows that 80% of Iowans are opposed to the laying of these pipelines when eminent domain is involved, which inherently it would have to be if these pipelines are eventually laid in Iowa.
This pipeline project, much like one that I covered a lot back at the Ames Tribune and then the Iowa Informer when I ran that website, the Dakota Access Pipeline, they have interesting, unusual political bedfellows. And it's interesting that after J.D. Schulten, I would say, was largely responsible for ousting Steve King or getting the Republican Party to finally have had enough with him. Now, in your case, Steve King is not an ally, I'm sure, but on this issue, you align, broadly speaking anyway, in your opposition to this carbon capture pipeline. We do.
There are some similar reasons why we align in this particular context, but some differences too. Steve King is not all that concerned about human-caused climate change mitigation. I certainly am. Yeah, and we have plenty of data that shows that the initial argument for these carbon capture pipelines was as a climate change mitigation strategy. But folks like the Sierra Club and many, many others, environmentalist groups on the left, were very quick to point out that the data we have over and over and over again shows that these carbon sequestration technologies underdeliver and that most of these projects use the captured carbon for enhanced oil recovery, which is absolutely illogical in the fact that these pipeline companies would stand to gain massive amounts of tax credits in the name of human-caused climate change mitigation, simply to turn around and take that carbon that they capture and essentially frack. It's a pretty similar process to fracking, where you inject the supercritical CO2 into dying oil fields, essentially, and get those dregs up.
Just get every last drop of that.
That's pretty much
gold.
Exactly. The oil and gas execs up in the Dakotas have been very clear that they want this captured CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, which unfortunately, as a real obvious sign of a corruption of our politics and our governance, you have a 45Q federal tax credit that is initiating the drive for these pipelines that gives you massive amounts of money for using captured carbon to grab oil, which obviously nullifies the point of the climate change mitigation credit. So there's a lot of grift, a lot of scam involved. And as someone who does believe that human-caused climate change is a significant threat, the fact that, corporate power has corrupted the writing of these climate change mitigation tax credits so much that we have situations like this now where corporations are stealing our land to put in pipelines that will do nothing to mitigate, notably, carbon emissions. is really unfortunate and something that I've been long fighting against and will continue to.
So you mentioned that polls show that like 80% of Iowans oppose pipelines like this. To my knowledge, you are a very small minority of political candidates who even talk about this. Is that only due to like the money factor because everybody's taking money from Bruce Rastetter and similar in oil industry executives and whatnot?
Let's flesh that out a little bit. It's a bit more nuanced than that. So there are actually a number of Democrats and Republicans at the state legislative level that have done a nice job speaking out against these pipelines. And I'll give some credit to Republicans on this. There was a group of about 40 Republican state legislators that banded together to sue the IUB, now the IUC. So, there have been politicians.
That's the Iowa Utilities. What's the C?
It was the board. Now I think it's the commission. I think IUC. Okay. It's the same
commission,
entity. They give a rationale for why they changed the acronym, but I just think it's because the IUB as an acronym became so toxic.
Yes.
IUB is not a very popular acronym in this congressional district. So, I'm not the only one that's been talking about it, but certainly Bruce Rastetter has not given me any money. I reject corporate PAC money, and I'm pretty much one of the preeminent poster children for the fight against these carbon capture pipelines since I was in the space so early. So
sure. So you say that you reject corporate PAC money. Has Bruce Rastetter made any attempt to buy you?
He has not.
Okay.
He has not. No, I have never heard from Bruce Rastetter. No, I have not. But I'm sure he knows of me. I'm sure he's not a big fan.
Sure. What about? Has he tried to kill you? Sorry, Kevin.
That's important.
Well, I have actually. Wait. I just want to make sure I heard that question correctly. Is he tried to kill me? Just want to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah. To your knowledge, I guess.
Well, I do have a story, but it's a very. I don't even know if I should share that. Well.
Now you know I want to hear it.
Let me just put it. Well, here's the thing. It may be nothing at all, even though I think it's probably something. But I have no idea who did it. Well, essentially, near the start of my second campaign, I walked out into my backyard with my then 5-year-old, now 6-year-old son, and there was an unspent bullet on the table in my backyard.
Just sitting on the table.
Sitting on the table, and I can tell you that bullet was not mine. I won't go into more detail than that. I can just tell you it wasn't mine. Now, there wasn't any kind of letter or email or voicemail or threat at all. So, I decided to move on with my life and not really pursue it any further. But I will tell you, there are times when, when I was at like the Summit informational session hearings and, and you're like taking on these corporate giants and being, very robust and poking as many holes as you can in their public presentation. And there are times where you worry about it. I certainly have had, but to be clear, I don't know if that's connected at all, but I think about it. Sure. Just since you asked. I mean, I
certainly feel weird about that, finding a bullet on a table in my backyard.
I thought it was pretty weird. I didn't like it. Well, especially in the context of the fact that I had near the, I think this is near the end of my first campaign. So I had both a Melton for Iowa sign in my front yard and an anti-carbon capture pipeline sign right next to each other. Mm-hmm. And the carbon capture pipeline sign was taken and the Melton sign was left behind. So, but again, I mean, there's a lot of money at stake here. I know that I've pissed off a lot of big money Democrats and Republicans because of my advocacy. I'm at peace with that because it's the right thing to do. But yeah, I mean, certainly with all this money on the line, all this power that's on the side of Summit, and the fact that there are times where where I've seen on my social media accounts waves of folks from that industry coming onto my platform just to attack me. Mm-hmm. And you actually do some digging into who is this person. And you find, it's like the executive director of the so-and-so Corn Ethanol Institute in state A, B, or C. And, it's interesting because they're kind of coordinated. They just come in waves at times. And I think they expect me not to reply because most politicians don't replies to their own posts.
Sure.
But I do reply. And I've gotten to some scraps with the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. So those have been fun scraps, and then my supporters go and join me, and it's a good time.
Okay, so this is a candidate of the Flame Wars. He's a veteran of the Flame Wars. He's a candidate
I'm
the
just
posters.
calling the truth as I see it. I mean, whatever platform it's on, that I feel that that's my obligation to the people.
What I was going to mention earlier,
yeah.
Before you rudely interrupted me,
I wanted to know if he's had attempts on his life. Okay,
no, I'm glad you asked.
I'll admit I wasn't ready for that question. I wasn't prepared to tell the bullet story.
Yeah,
which again may not.
We got a scoop.
It seems like a story to me. I don't know how the bullet got there, but I don't know anything more than that. So maybe it's a non-story. I don't know.
Yeah, I won't interrupt you this time, Gavin.
Well, I'm sure that Jess Vilsack was not responsible for that, but preparing for this episode, I was reminded that he was, I don't know if he still is. I assume he's still part of Summit.
I believe he is, yes.
So
he's
have you had any
council, I think,
encounters with him, or do you think that's part of why there's, this bipartisan support? Perhaps why Democrats have not taken advantage of this more as a seeming like a pretty popular, campaign.
It's a slam dunk issue, really.
Yeah.
Unless you're owned by corporate power, then I guess it's not. Let's. As far as any interactions I've had with Jess Vilsack, no, I haven't had any.
He was the son of the former governor Tom Vilsack, to be clear.
Mm-hmm. As far as on the Democratic side, you've got big money Democrats and big money Republicans that, are pissed off at me and, are rabble-rousing ways. But you've got a lot of Democrats at the more local level who are not your establishment Democrats who are robustly opposed to these pipelines. So in the Iowa State House, so last session, there was a bill that was introduced that sought to give landowners some relief in the event of eminent domain approval for these pipelines, and every Democrat was on board. And there are about, I think, 7 Republicans that actually voted against that. And in the anti-pipeline boards, that gained some traction. They noticed that. Also, when the IUB, before they became the IUC, I think it was in June or July, when they approved, conditionally anyway, the eminent domain request of Summit for these pipelines. A credit to the rural caucus of the Iowa Democratic Party. They released a letter strongly denouncing that eminent domain approval, which I was a signatory on. I think there was roughly 100 other prominent Democrats in rural Iowa that signed on to that too. So there is a lot of robust opposition at the ground level on the Democratic side.
Mm-hmm.
And I should say, to be fair, among the Republican rank and file, same thing. Robust opposition to the pipelines. It's if you have not been given a bunch of money by Bruce Rastetter, you probably don't like it.
Yeah. There's been a lot of crossover. I mean, every time I talk to somebody about the pipeline thing, that's like their biggest takeaway is like it's everyone who lives in these communities does not want it.
Absolutely.
So Ryan, I don't know if you ever like go on YouTube, but every ad I get on there right now is pretty much Christina Bohannon or Lanon Bacam. I've noticed that I've not seen any ads featuring your face and your voice. Why is that?
They've got a lot more money than I do.
And where did that money come from?
Well, those are the 2 districts that the DCCC are supporting. I have made very clear that I'm not a fan of the DCCC. I have not pulled any punches there. It's money. I'm not a rich guy. I'm not a connected guy. I literally work a full-time job, a 9-to-5 job, and have a wife and 2 kids. My life wasn't built for this. I literally had no connections, no pedigree, no money coming into this. I was not recruited by anyone, so I'm truly a grassroots guy, an independent guy.
Didn't you have a story about the DCCC contacting you at one point?
Very recently.
Well, there's
right?
a couple. Yeah, I'd say the first one is quite simply someone in our congressional district sent me a picture of this letter from the DCCC. There's a fundraising letter saying something to the effect of, we've been creating headquarters to support U.S. House candidates, and we recently planted one in Iowa. Donate to us, and we'll be able to do more in that space. And someone sent me a picture of that letter, and I laughed. because I'm not getting any money from the DCCC. But it was funny at first, but then it was frustrating and I think disingenuous because this person thought, wow, so the DCCC is stepping up to the plate and supporting Ryan Melton, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. And so I had to tell them, I'm not going to see any of that money. And if you donate to the DCCC, none of that money is staying in the district. So I've been very transparent about that. The more recent story that Gavin's referring to, this was a couple of weeks ago. I got a text message from a poor guy named Rodney. Poor Rodney, a DCCC volunteer who has, none of my ire directed toward poor Rodney. But he said, it just blew my mind that I got this stuff. It was in the upside down. It was surreal time. So I got this text message from a guy at the DCCC, and it said, hey, we're looking to expand our operations in Iowa, and we're looking for volunteers to house our congressional candidates. Are you up for housing volunteers that help our congressional candidates? And I replied and I said, well, I am one of your congressional candidates. And and then I went on kind of a rant about how I hate the DCCC.
So
but again, it wasn't. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, did they contact you? Because you're from Nevada, right? So is that because you're close?
I recently moved from Nevada to Webster City. I mean, I wonder if they saw Nevada and they're like, oh, we can help.
I was going to say, it's close to the third.
Yeah. And look, I mean, that's fine. But the fact that they texted me that,
right,
having literally never, here's the thing, I am long over any frustration I have about the lack of money I get from them, the lack of support I get from them. I'm over that. I'm at peace with that. And it really helps to solidify the fact that I am an independent guy. I don't use party talking points. I do what I want. I say what I want. It's very freeing. So I'm long over that whole thing. I'm not over the fact that they send these misleading, disingenuous fundraising letters to my friends in the fourth. I'm not over that.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be different, a bit different, not a lot different, but a bit different if they had taken any time to send me a single text message, letter, email, acknowledging my presence and saying, hey, back in 2022, if you didn't step up, we literally would have had a blank spot on the ballot in the fourth. So thank you for running. I've literally not heard anything from them. Literally not one iota of acknowledgement of anything from them. So then when I get a text like that,
hey, can we put someone in your house?
Yeah, hey, Ryan M. from Nevada, Iowa. Hey, can you house volunteers that are going to help
someone else's campaign
candidates? And well, I mean, I could, but it'd be nice just to get some acknowledgement that I am literally one of those congressional candidates that you claim to be helping in your fundraising letters, knowing that 100% of money donated by 4th District residents to the DCCC will not stay in our congressional district. So it's, it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And it's not a very competitive district. So, you kind of you understand why they're not going to invest a ton of resources in your campaign. But like you said, though, getting on the ballot, not leaving a blank space there, that's providing something for the party's presence, right?
No one asked me to do this, right? No one. I literally am miserable and sleep deprived all the time because it's a sacrifice that I am giving to the greater good. I'm not doing this as an opportunist. If I was, I would have moved to the third. I had a lot of people after the first campaign say, okay, yeah, you can do this. Why don't you move to the third where you supposedly have a shot? And I said, well, I'm not a carpetbagger. I'm going to run where I live. So screw that. But
respect.
I'm not.
Did you see that tweet from Chris Jones, who suggested that you, as opposed to Rob Sand, should run for governor in 2026? You're not going to take him up on that?
I think I remember what you're talking about. Let's put it this way. And Chris Jones is a great dude. I love Chris. Mm-hmm. I may be one of the only Democrats he likes, so I wear that as a badge of honor. So look. It is hard for me to think past Election Day. I mean, I literally woke up at 6:00 this morning, have been on the road campaigning all day, and just got home 14 hours later. And I have a full-time job that I have to go back to on Monday. I am exhausted. I'm miserable. Like, there's a reason no one else wants to do this.
And let me just say that is the perfect state of mind to be in to go on a podcast. So thank you for spending another hour of your time with us.
Absolutely. So any talk about what I might do after Election Day 2024, I have literally no idea at all. But I'm grateful that Chris thinks highly of me. I have a lot of respect for Chris. We have a massive water quality issue in this state, and that's leading to a lot of no pun intended downstream consequences, public health issues, tourism issues, recreation issues. And who in the hell wants to live in a community where your water is green and full of algae blooms? And that's got to have a psychological impact on you too. So I'm super, super appreciative of Chris for all the work that he's doing, because I talked about water quality. I talked about the cancer crisis back in 22, and it didn't really feel like a lot of other people were talking about it. And a lot of times when I talked about it, I was accused of being anti-farmer, which I think is really offensive to farmers, actually. There's no one entity of people is a monolith, obviously. I talked to plenty of farmers that, were like at Iowa Farmers Union meetings, and they're all about regenerative agriculture, sustainability, lessening their impact on our water as far as pollution. There are a number of farmers out there that have already implemented mitigative practices. But obviously, it's not enough. There's still a massive problem out there.
Right. And these are farmers that they probably don't control as much land as
absolutely
the larger interests that don't care about those things.
I think that's a safe assumption to make. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, before we forget about him, do you have any thoughts on our state auditor, Rob Sand?
Not really. Keep in mind, I'm running in the frozen tundra, the barren landscape of the 4th Congressional District, the
Lost
redheaded
Kingdom.
stepchild. No offense to redheaded stepchildren. So I don't really have a whole lot of thoughts, honestly. I've been in the same room as him. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times. I don't know, like half a dozen times. We talked a few times. Those have always been cordial, but that's pretty much it. I guess as far as just focusing on his role as auditor, I'm certainly grateful that he's the auditor, not Todd Halber. So I think that, I think also that just in general, getting into the fact that there's been a big stripping of his power is something that has resonated as a big concern among Republicans in this congressional district. Just in general, the idea that any governor, any gubernatorial administration would go as far as making it harder for any auditor or auditing agency to assess and have the transparency they need to hold people accountable. When you talk to Republicans in the 4th, and a lot of this is Democrats too, but a lot of the Republicans in the 4th are very concerned about things like corruption, and that's just brazen corruption. If it was a Democratic governor reducing the powers of a Republican auditor, I'd say the exact same thing. If I was the governor, going back to the Chris Jones tweet, if I was Iowa's governor, I would welcome every possible audit, because I would want to prove over and over and over again that I had a clean bill of health, that I was running the state with transparency, legally, with class, with grace. But I'd say that's pretty much it. Rob and I haven't really had a long conversation or anything like that. We've had a few passing conversations at the occasional event I see him at.
Well, speaking of auditing, this reminds me that Kevin Virgil on his campaign website, one of his issues is he wants to audit the Fed. Among many other things that are classic New York liberal viewpoints, as
Feenstra was calling him during their primary.
Yeah. East Coast elitist.
Kevin Virgil running to Feenstra's right in the primary.
Yeah.
Being called a New York liberal when he endorsed me by Feenstra is just laughable.
So that was really funny to watch.
Speaking of carpetbaggers, though, he did move here to run, right?
Well, I'll give Kevin some credit. He was born and raised here, and he left to go to college and serve in the military. So, I'll give him a pass on that one. I think the other thing too, the fact that there are plenty of Republican rank and file voters that really don't like Randy Feenstra, but no one else stepped up to challenge him. So, I mean, maybe it'd be different if there was someone that had been living in Iowa for a long time that stepped up to challenge him, but no one else was going to do it. And, I would also suspect that Kevin was waiting to see. And in fact, I not just suspect, he has said that he waited to see if someone else would challenge, and that's why Kevin got in so late. And I think one of the reasons he lost, because he built an awful lot of momentum. I'm all over in the 4th Congressional District, and there was a lot of Kevin Virgil momentum, but he started so late. I think if he probably started 3 months earlier, considering how unpopular Feenstra is, he may have been able to win that primary.
Yeah, he took almost 40% of the primary vote, if I remember correctly. Yeah. I really enjoyed watching the Republican kind of freak out, or whatever you call it, when he endorsed you.
I also enjoyed that.
What do you make of that? Because this district the 4th is obviously generally considered to be a safe Republican district. What do you attribute most of that to? Well,
first of all, let me say, Kevin Virgil and I obviously disagree on plenty of things, but we align in a few very interesting ways. So let me kind of establish that first before I answer your question. He is literally the only Republican elected official or candidate in this state that I've been able to find that even acknowledges we have a cancer crisis in the state. And I know that because he was literally retweeting my posts on it during his primary run against Feenstra. So that's number one. Number two, his robust opposition to the carbon capture pipelines. Number three, he was not awash in corporate money. He was not recruited by big corporate interests, didn't raise a whole lot of money. The fact that he got 40% of the vote, won 9 counties, some by double digits, considering he had such a short campaign, considering he had very little money, really shows you not only that his message broke through, but also that Feenstra's message is really not resonating. So as far as, to get to your point, on the very public Iowa Republican Party panic the week after the Virgil endorsement, which was a lot of fun to watch. And the fact that Randy Feenstra literally retweeted every single one, every single one of those circle the wagons tweets. So what does it mean, though? So this was contextually maybe 2 or 3 weeks before that the Iowa poll came out that showed Kamala is only 4 points back of Trump. Mm-hmm. So a reasonable person would look at the fact that the Iowa Republican Party amplified that Virgil endorsement of me so much and say, why in the heck did they do that? That makes no sense. They should have just ignored it. They amplified it so much that it became national news, made it onto the New York Post. Well, there's only really one logical explanation for it, which is they had internal numbers they did not like, and they felt like they were on the precipice, and they felt like they had to shame their candidates, they had to shame their rank and file into being in lockstep with the Republican Party establishment. And because they felt like they had to take the risk of amplifying the story because their internal numbers were not where they wanted them to be. And I think that Iowa poll that came out soon after corroborated that. Now, again, I mean, my race, it's a safe Republican district for now. I mean, I'd like to think that if enough variables align, we can win this thing. I mean, J.D. Sheldon almost won it a few cycles back. Again, a lot of variables would have to align. I get that. I'm not selling false hope. I'm not being naive about that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a media character assassination of the Honorable Steve King, so that was a factor.
Yeah, I mean, the 2018 cycle was a very interesting one. But ultimately, we now have the 1st and the 3rd congressional districts that are considered toss-ups.
Yeah, they just changed it. I saw the political rating, right?
Yep. And in my race, so looking at those Iowa poll numbers, we went from 24% in February to 35% in June to 38% with the most recent one. So clearly we've got some momentum here. And that 38% was literally just at the very beginning of that Virgil endorsement bounce that I think we're going to continue to get. Because I think that Virgil endorsement is going to give a lot of Republicans who have already been telling me before that Virgil endorsement that they are going to vote for me as a protest vote. They're not going to, flock to change their party affiliation or anything, but they're really disappointed in and fed up with their leadership. And I've heard so many Republicans say they're going to vote for me as a protest vote. I've literally talked to people within county party leadership that say they're going to vote for me because they're so disgusted with the direction of the state Republican Party. And so there is something happening out here in the fourth. And so I certainly think that as I continue to talk to more Republicans, that we're going to do a big text campaign featuring the Virgil endorsement this weekend. We're going to, we've already done a couple of rounds of newspaper ads here in the district. We're going to do some radio ads. We're going to do some potentially some streaming platform ads as well in the final 30 days. I think as that story gets out more and more and more, Republicans who have long been dissatisfied with the fact that they've been taken for granted and been sold out by their leadership, I think we can make a run at this thing. I think that a lot of Republicans are ready to do something different to send a message. And I know that is on the ground. Well, here's the thing. I actually literally had in 22 a lot of Steve King voters that once they talked with me, they did end up voting for me. They voted for a Democrat for the first time in their lives. Okay. In 22, I was literally just trying to keep my nostrils above the waterline. It was I was just trying not to drown. I started the second campaign much, much sooner, already had our infrastructure built. So I've been able to do some things I wasn't able to do last time. One of them is to get in front of a lot of Republicans. And those conversations have always gone very well. And a number of Steve King voters have said they're going to vote for me this time. And the reasons they give, might be surprising to some, but they're not really surprising to me. I think that, there's Gavin's kitty. Oh, that's cute. Hi, Gavin's cat.
Oh.
So, sorry, I like kitties. So, okay, I've talked to a number of Steve King voters who they give me the time of day because of the carbon capture pipeline issue. They're like, okay, you're the first guy to take a stance on this. I respect you. Your foot's in the door. Let's talk. So a lot of folks who voted for Steve King have told me I didn't like a lot. They didn't like a lot of the stuff Steve King said or did. But the one thing that kept them compelled is that in an interesting way, that stuff that we certainly didn't like that he said, it led them to feel like he was an independent actor. It led them to think that, wow, if he's willing to say that kind of stuff, he must really not be owned by anyone.
Donald Trump effect. He gets the same
It's
credit.
pretty similar to that.
Yeah.
And, they tell me the same thing, like, hey, it is very clear that you were not pumped out of a candidate factory. Like, you are literally taking on the DCCC, like your own party. I got into a fight with the state leadership over Palestine, very public about that, and didn't pull any punches there. And they respect that. They're like, you are clearly an independent actor who calls it as you see it. And while we may disagree on plenty of things, the number one thing that a lot of voters, regardless of party affiliation, want is a candidate they can trust. Because if you have a candidate you can trust, it is more likely they will at least have an earnest conversation with you and will give any concerns you have fair consideration. If you don't trust the candidate that's on the ballot, you have no idea who you're dealing with. Like, you have no idea what the baseline is. You have no idea if you'll ever be able to engage in an honest conversation. And a guy like Randy Feenstra, he's gotten so much flack from the Republican rank and file because he's an absentee congressman. As far as I can tell, he's only had one pre-announced and pre-advertised public town hall. And that was literally just like a month or so ago. I was on the Iowa Press today, which is where I would have debated him. For the second year in a row, or the second cycle in a row, he has refused to debate me. Not just on Iowa Press, but in a number of other forums. And so when you consider all the variables as to why people voted for Steve King, even though they didn't necessarily like a lot of what he said, you can start to understand, okay, I can see how they could draw that or make that logical jump and vote for a guy like Melton, even if they disagree with him on a number of things.
And speaking of Iowa Press, can I bring something up here? When you were on it previously, you referred to yourself as a practical progressive, also mentioned populist. And I think one of the interesting things about being a candidate in your position is that a lot of people probably count you out just because of the demographic, voter demographics of the district, and you have an opportunity that I wish, I'm sure Justin agrees too, that we would see from more Iowa Democrats having a straight up, progressive, bold campaign platform. You mentioned Palestine, this carbon capture stuff. Yeah. There's several other issues, Medicare for all, I believe I saw on your website.
Yep.
Is that something that you find to resonate more than people might think in among
Oh,
the
absolutely.
voters of the Fourth.
Absolutely. I mean, again, Kevin Virgil ran to the right of Randy Feenstra and endorsed me. And a lot of it was because not only that we had some overlapping agreement in issues that happen to be very big issues in our congressional district, but he also knows that that he can trust me. He knows that I call it as I see it. And there's this message over and over again that comes up in Iowa Democratic circles that in a red state, you have to water down your message. You have to play to the middle. You can't ruffle too many feathers. But here's the thing. People have pretty good bullshit detectors. And really what you're saying is that you have to bullshit your way to getting someone's vote. But going back to what I just said a few minutes ago, the number one thing that a lot of voters care about is trust, their ability to trust you. So how can you develop that connection, that trust, while bullshitting them? It just doesn't work. Labels carry some value, some significance, because they tell you, okay, this is where my common community is, right? Mm-hmm. There's value in labels, but they are way too simplistic. So what I mean by that is if you go to, like what I've gone to, a number of these anti-carbon capture protest events, which are mostly attended by Republicans, right. And that's primarily because in rural Iowa, you're mostly going to have Republicans.
That's just most of the people. Yeah.
Right. Even though massive Democratic opposition to these pipelines. Mm-hmm. If you were like a political scientist or a sociologist and you were going to try to go into this room of people and chart out some kind of schematic that attempts to holistically capture what their worldview is, you wouldn't be able to do it on a two-dimensional linear scale. Like you'd have to do it if you really wanted to get it right on like one of those spherical graphs you see where there's like a core and then you see each of these bars shooting out from the center that represents different issues. Like if you really wanted to do it right, it'd be a sphere, a core with 100+ issues shooting out. And if you did it like that and you talked with all 100 people at one of these anti-carbon capture protest hearings, even if they're mostly Republicans, those spherical representations of their holistic worldviews would be rather different, even though they all classify as Republican. Mm-hmm. And so this progressive label, I think it is helpful in some contexts when Democrats are trying to consider as an easy assessment of, okay, maybe Melton is more likely in alignment with more of my views than another kind of Democrat. But as far as like in these circles, like I not one time, not a single time have I had a Republican ask me what kind of Democrat I am. Not one time have I had a Republican say, are you a centrist Democrat? Are you a progressive Democrat?
Are you one of them liberals?
Are you one? Yeah, right. Like they don't they don't ask those kinds of questions. The first question they ask over and over again is who owns me? That's what they care about because it goes back to trust. Who owns you? And I encourage them to go to Open Secrets and look up who gives me my money, and they'll see, well, he takes $0.00 of corporate PAC money, whereas Randy Feenstra literally takes hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate PAC money. And that prolongs the conversation even further because, they can see that they can trust that what I'm saying is what I believe. Now, mm-hmm. That's not the same thing as them agreeing with everything I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's an impossible bar to hit, even among Democratic rooms. It's about whether I stack one trustability factor on top of the other until I hit a threshold where they say, wow, okay, you got my attention. And that's happening more and more out there. And again, is one of the reasons why Virgil endorsed me, because I do not hesitate to talk to rooms full of Republicans. But when I do, I'm incredibly honest and transparent about who I am. I don't pander. I call it as I see it. I let the chips fall where they may. Like when I went on Iowa Press today, when they asked me about Israel, Palestine, I could have punted that. But that's not what I do. And I gave what is my honest view of it.
Yeah, well, I have not... I haven't seen that clip, but I do consider the Israel-Palestine situation right now to be probably the most pressing, maybe global issue. I mean, you're running for a position in the federal government, so like you'd have some hand in future foreign policy decisions.
Yeah.
And I did open this up a little bit to listeners to our show. I told them we're going to be interviewing congressional candidates. Do you want to ask them anything? And our friend Aaron asked this question. Now that it's clear that Israel intends to escalate the Gazan genocide into a large-scale war, will you support and encourage ceasefire negotiations, including a complete arms embargo and economic sanctions?
So I've long called for, and you can go verify this on my social media accounts. I don't remember the exact month this was. You guys could probably look it up, but it was when there were votes on funding for Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel, and there was a fourth. I think it was disaster assistance. I think these big 4 votes that maybe it was like 5 or 6 months ago. I don't know. Well, and even before that, I made very clear that I would be a no vote on providing offensive military aid to Netanyahu. And I've been on the record on that front for a long time, and I reiterated that on Iowa Press today. And as I've said on Iowa Press, as I've said numerous times before, what Hamas did was horrible. What Hezbollah has done is horrible. I think that obviously what happened on October 7th was horrible and indefensible. And so, but here's the thing: while it is a worthwhile goal to rid Palestine of Hamas leadership, that doesn't mean you can just disregard humanitarian issues and civilian casualty. And clearly, when you're dropping non-precision munitions on densely populated areas in Gaza and killing, but we know that a big bulk of the population of Gaza are young people who never voted for Hamas. The last election they had, I think, was like 2007 or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Most of these kids that are dying, most of these young people that are dying, never voted for Hamas, right? This conflation of Palestinians with Hamas is a false conflation.
And many are not even alive.
Exactly. And that's very easy to assess. And people are being intellectually dishonest when they say that all Palestinians are Hamas. And so there is no such thing as civilian casualties, which, people within Netanyahu's cabinet have said. And that is shocking and immoral and heartless. And so I've been very clear on the record for that for a long time. Heck, dating back to the fall of 2023, when the University of Iowa Democrats statement came out. You could certainly quibble about their wording, but they're kids, man. They're college students doing the best they can to fight the good fight and to stand up for people that are dispossessed and are being unfair. Well, just killed by the thousands. Like their intention clearly was not, one of anti-Semitism.
But what do you think about the immediate condemnation from Rita Hart, the head of the Democratic Party?
All that's been very clearly laid out. Like all of my quotes are in the press from that time.
Yeah.
I very clearly stood up in defense of the students. And, I think it's a fair conversation around phraseology.
I do remember you
that's fine.
tweeting about that, yeah.
Yeah, it is a reasonable conversation to have about, did they use the right phraseology? And phraseology matters, words matter. So that's fair, but intention also matters. And it was clear that their intention was not anti-Semitic because of the edits they made and the outreach they were doing in the build-up to releasing that statement. There's been so much of this knee-jerk reaction when people are just trying to honestly and earnestly defend human rights around the globe. And the Democratic Party is supposed to be the party of human rights, civil rights. It's obviously incredibly complicated, and but it's clear that, as I made the point on Iowa Press today, what Hamas did is horrible, and they should not be in a leadership position in Palestine. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. They should not be in a leadership position, obviously. The ultimate question is, do Netanyahu's actions make it more or less likely that Palestinians and Israelis will see long-lasting peace? That's the question. That's the test.
Sure.
Has Netanyahu acted in a way that would promote long-lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians? I think the answer is clearly no. And look, you can go look at Israeli outlet after Israeli outlet. Israeli citizens are very frustrated with Netanyahu and feel that he is not representing them. There's been a robust movement to get him out of office for quite a long time in Israel as well. So this idea, so a Rainy Feenster, right? So Rainy Feenster will tweet something like, I will always stand up for Israel. But what does that mean? does that mean you're just going to stand up for Netanyahu, or does that mean you're going to stand up for the millions of Israelis that are anti-Netanyahu?
It's a big social media theme of his, like very simplistic, reductive little catchphrase.
And I'm like, so here's the thing, like, and this actually, I would encourage you to watch the Iowa Press piece from today.
Gavin,
because
you did, right, Gavin? Like I said, he prepared
not the one
more
from
than
today,
I did.
but
okay. Yeah, 2 years ago. So after I essentially stated all that, the next question, and it wasn't like a devious question or an unfair question or anything. It's just a question because other people often say this. The questioner was like, well, often when someone gives an opinion like that, the blow or the pushback is that if you don't give a full-throated defense of what Netanyahu is doing, you're just anti-Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And I replied, I strongly disagree with that. I think that, again, you can both be anti-Netanyahu's actions and pro long-lasting Israeli and Palestinian peace. And this idea that we can't have nuanced conversation about this, when that's not even all that nuanced, right?
No, not at all.
I think is a disservice, and I think makes more and more people think that so much of politics is just this political BS optics game where there isn't really legislating and decision-making and problem-solving being done in good faith.
Yeah, and I promise this is in good faith. Okay, this is also not a devious question, but like I said, this issue is very important to me, and to a lot of people, and a lot of people that I know are listening to this, and you know, Ryan, that this conflict, to use a very generic term, this conflict did not begin on October 7th of 2023.
Oh, absolutely not.
This conflict did not begin with the formation of Hamas, nor Hamas's election to leadership of Palestine. So,
absolutely,
given the Israeli state's actions toward the people of Gaza and the West Bank, what would be acceptable resistance to the actions of the state of Israel?
Well, let's start with what happened on October 7th, for example. Acknowledging you're absolutely right that obviously the story didn't begin on October 7th.
Yeah.
It began a long time before that. But to answer your question as far as what's legitimate resistance, I don't think, well, I shouldn't say no one can. Let me just speak to my own opinion on it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, keeping in mind, we're fucking Americans. Like we...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't see how it's defensible that any group that identifies themselves as resistance fighters can go to a music festival of people that are clearly not military combatants and slaughter a lot of them. Now, that's just not, in my opinion, legitimate. Those are a bunch of kids that have nothing to do with the fact that you're seeing this expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which is obviously immoral and awful, and that's been a long-running thing long before October 7th, right? But so that the idea that, a resistance fighting group, if you want to call that a group that in general, going to a music festival and killing a bunch of young kids, it's just not defensible. It's just not. Personally, it's a tough question to answer. It really is. I mean, the fact that you've been seeing these expanding Israeli settlements for such a long time. The fact that, we've seen Netanyahu, and there's been plenty written on this in the Israeli press, that Netanyahu did plenty to embolden Hamas, not thinking that Hamas would end up doing something at this scale. The fact that he let in a lot of cash flow knowingly to Hamas, let that money go through. And in large part because of things like, Netanyahu has never declared public support robustly for a two-state solution, right? As far as what is legitimate resistance, I mean, personally, it's a fair question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I'm just going to be real on that. I don't think it's legitimate resistance to go to a music festival and kill a bunch of young kids. It's not. But when you have Israeli citizens, and this is well documented, I'm not making anything up here. I'm sure you're all well aware of this. The fact that there's been this massive expansion of Israeli settlements into Palestinian lands and homes, where Palestinians are being assaulted, murdered, their homes are being burned down. If you are a Palestinian family, on your land in your home, and someone is coming at you trying to kill you and take your land and burn your house down, what would you do? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that context, any American in that context would defend their home.
Right.
So I think that is a reasonable perspective from which to look at it. But here's what I would say. I always do the best I can to come from the nonviolent tradition of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. That's what I'm grounded in, and so that's the perspective that I try to approach it from.
You have a master's in history,
when you're a
right?
Palestinian family and someone is coming and trying to murder you and your kids and take your home from you, you can't sit there and just have peaceful nonviolent resistance as they're trying to murder you and take your home from you.
And it's not like large masses of Palestinians haven't tried nonviolent resistance as well.
Oh,
and
right.
have been met with violence.
Right.
So that also doesn't always work. Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I was going to say, I saw on your, not to interrupt, but I saw on your campaigns that you have a master's in history, right? And you studied that
U.S.
at Iowa
history,
State.
yep.
U.S. history,
Yep.
yeah.
Bachelor's from Iowa State, master's from Kansas, yeah.
Right, yeah. So I imagine that's informed your thoughts on things like this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I made this point too on Iowa Press today. Both Biden and Harris have said they're in favor of a two-state solution. Is Netanyahu in favor of a two-state solution? I don't think anyone would think he is, right? Per what we know. How can you reconcile those two things, right? Like, where does this end? Like, if we believe in a two-state solution, and yet we're providing massive amounts of military aid to Netanyahu, whose goals and vision do not reconcile with ours, where does that end? And I don't think that question has really been answered.
Yeah,
when does it stop? Does Netanyahu just completely wipe out Gaza?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, to the point to where like a Kushner says, "Oh man, this like all the beachfront property in Gaza we could build on," like, which is just disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
That he said that, and he said that so freely. It just really, it just really jarred me. So, what's the end game there, right? They can't show us an end game. Netanyahu cannot show an end game. The fact, but we continue to supply him, with that aid. Here's another thing too. I saw a poll that came out just the other day. There was a poll of Arab Americans done, assessing their assessment of the presidential election here, looking through the context of Israel and Palestine. And clearly, among Arab Americans, understandably so, there's a lot of anger, and it will affect a good chunk of their votes, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the argument that I hear a lot from Democrats, and I understand the argument, I'm not saying it's a bad argument necessarily. The argument I often hear in response to that is, well, Donald Trump's not going to be any better, and it'll probably be worse. But that's ignoring the fact that you have a lot of these Arab Americans answering that poll that have friends and family that have died in Palestine.
Right. It's not a good defense of our current administration's just continued enabling of mass slaughter. Yeah. Like
this idea that we can just tell an Arab American family who's lost friends or family in Palestine, "Oh, I'm sorry, but, U.S. geopolitics matters more than your family that has died." Like, no, I'm not going to tell an Arab American family that. I think that'd be really inhumane.
The other guy will kill your family twice.
Right. Mm-hmm. I understand the argument that I hear from my Democratic friends that try to say, well, Trump would be worse, but they have literally lost friends and family over there. And so at some point, if you're making that argument, which again, I think is an argument being made in good faith, because obviously there are a lot of concerns about Donald Trump's second term. Obviously.
I think they're scared of Trump, yeah, but they're saying something pretty awful.
And so I think those arguments are being made in good faith, but here's the thing. That argument is being made assuming that there's hope, right? Because what I mean by that is that if you choose one over another, things will notably change in the Israeli-Palestinian context. Like hope, like, oh, one voting decision over another, there's actually some hope to be gained from that decision. But when you've lost friends and family, that's the death of hope. Right. And so then what do people lean on when there's a death of hope? Grieving, loss, anger, needing to send a message that we cannot just be taken for granted like this. So look, am I voting for Kamala Harris? I am. Do I think that she's been robust enough on this issue to my liking? No. At the same time, I don't think it is the right approach, and I don't think it's a defensible approach personally, even though the argument's being made in good faith, that we go to an Arab American family who's lost friends or family over there, or who have friends and family over there that haven't lost their lives but face imminent danger every day, and just tell them to suck it up. Like, I just don't. I don't think that's a defensible argument.
No. Well, how do you feel about the Liz Cheney stuff that's going on right now? The Democratic ticket embracing the Liz Cheney endorsement and campaigning with her, on stage.
Yeah, many of the neocons from the Bush era, including her father.
Dick Cheney is going to vote for Kamala too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, it depends on context, right? In the overall context, I think that a Kamala Harris presidency would be much better holistically for both domestic and international security and success than a second Donald Trump term. So that as a baseline, lends to an argument that if a Liz Cheney is endorsing and we're having a bigger tent as a party, that makes it more likely that more people will be safe and secure in a Harris administration, that you'll have less loss of reproductive rights, hopefully more workers' rights, more protection of our environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Now, here's the thing. You also do have to reckon with the fact that a Liz Cheney and a Dick Cheney, I protested the Iraq War, the second Iraq War.
Right. Isn't there some risk of maybe alienating some people as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think that's fair. I rabidly protested the second Iraq War in college. It was awful. It was absolutely shameful that our mainstream press just led that drumbeat to war when I could go look at The Guardian or the BBC or The Independent out of the UK and article after article simply rebutting the claims on intelligence that a Powell was making, that a Cheney was making, a Rumsfeld was making, a Bush was making.
Yeah, I think we had McClatchy and not anyone else really in the U.S. press.
Yeah, so I mean that was just such a horrible, horrible time for our country. We haven't even talked about Guantanamo Bay, and like Dick Cheney did a lot of horrible, horrible things. That Iraq War was not justified. As awful as Saddam Hussein was, no way you can justify just the mass death of Iraqis, and also the void in power that opened up that ISIS took advantage of. Like that, just such an awful, awful thing. So
right. I'd also just
Dick
like
Cheney
to point out
the
connection there. The past is the present. Like this is just seemingly what our country is always doing, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I think it's a fair question to say, hey, should we be touting that Liz Cheney endorsement? I would say ultimately nothing is clean and squeaky. Nothing is perfect. There are a lot of people, and there is a difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in a lot of different ways. Even if Kamala is not, perfect on Israel, Palestine, for example, and she's far from it, but there are women dying in red states right now because of abortion bans. We can go down the list, right? A Kamala Harris presidency would be much better than a Donald Trump presidency. I think that is just objectively true. And so, Liz Cheney getting on stage and touting, I think Liz Cheney deserves some credit. She did have to have some courage being on the January 6th committee. I mean, she knew when she served on that committee she was going to lose in Wyoming, and she lost resoundingly. So there's some credit there. But I mean, as far as her policy stances, I mean, I'm certainly not a fan of her policy stances. But I guess the other thing to consider, too, though, is that when you have such a stark choice where you have a guy in Donald Trump who has literally called for suspending parts of the Constitution, who has been empowered by that recent Supreme Court decision, a good chunk of immunity now for so-called official actions. Sometimes I think you can make an argument, and you could make a good faith argument that is a decent one, that the threat of a Donald Trump presidency is so severe in so many different contexts that it brings out certain fundamental issues in stark contrast and elevates their importance. So this idea of defending basic fundamental human rights and the fact that those are under extreme threat under a Trump administration. We haven't even talked about LGBTQ plus rights. I have so many friends in the LGBTQ plus community that are terrified. So many trans friends that are terrified about what a second Trump term looks like, I think you just have to consider this all holistically. That's why I'm absolutely going to vote for Kamala Harris, knowing that I have some strong disagreements with her on things like Israel-Palestine.
I want to give
although I will say, to be
quick,
fair, we don't really know her entire vision on that yet either. So that I say that kind of assumptively, considering the fact that she hasn't robustly said we need to stop funding offensive military aid to Netanyahu. So I'm assuming a little bit there.
Yeah, there's a gap there, certainly. I do want to
so there's still a lot we don't know.
I also have a lot of trans friends who are absolutely not voting for Kamala Harris, primarily because of
and that's fair.
The Biden administration's role in the genocide. So
totally fair. And again, that is 100% fair. And the idea that some Democrats would listen to you say that and then shame those trans friends of yours is wrongheaded. Because look, to question someone who thinks that a genocide is the number one concern they have, why wouldn't it be the number one concern, you know? So you can make that argument, and it's a good argument to make. So to just shame them for that, I think is the wrong approach. Absolutely wrong approach.
The responsibility lies with the people doing the genocide and the people enabling it and funding it and all that.
Here's another thing too. During the DNC, there was that debate that broke out about whether they should allow a Palestinian speaker on the stage. Just why not do that? I just could not believe. I could not believe that whoever was running that just dug in their heels on that.
Well, especially because it sounded like they had the option to pick someone who they could keep on message as to not, run too afoul of what the party wanted.
It just was so wrong-headed and short-sighted. And in that poll, poll of Arab Americans that I cited, which shows, obviously, understandably, Gaza is a big concern, and as it should be.
Yeah.
They also were asked that question: if there was a Palestinian speaker that got up at the DNC, would that have changed their opinion? And a lot of them said it would have helped shift their opinion, because the fact that there unfortunately has often been a failure of a basic acknowledgement of the problem. And so we have a long ways to go when we don't allow a Palestinian speaker on the stage of the DNC. I just don't see how you defend that. Yeah,
it's a complete just denial that anything is wrong. It's pretty blatant racism. Like, just, I don't know how else you interpret that. Yeah,
it is.
We should probably start wrapping this up. Gavin, do you have any other serious questions for Ryan?
I have a non-serious question.
Oh, I have one of those too.
Lay it on me.
You go first.
Okay, mine is also from a listener. If you were a transformer, what vehicle or animal would you transform into?
Oh my gosh. Okay, that is a jarring shift. How could I answer a question like that? That's why you ask it, because how in the hell do you transition to something like that? That's right. What we've just been talking about.
Catch them off guard.
All right. Well, this is going to sound probably dumb, but I'm going to do what I want. I don't care. So, do you know what a taper is?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, tapers are pretty cool. Oh, I grew up in Omaha, so Henry Doorly Zoo, So
right on.
I like seeing the tapers
hundreds of times.
They're just...
That is where I have seen them.
Yeah. They're down in the jungle.
Well, I'll be honest. I don't know a whole lot about the geographical background of tapers. I just know they look funny. But I commiserate with tapers because I too look funny. It looks like I'm two different creatures. From the waist down, I have runner's legs, but I have a massive belly and a fat face and big head. And so I'm like two different creatures glued together, much like a taper. So nice. I commiserate with the taper. I also like sloths because it would be really cool if, as an adult, I could be as tired and sleepy and lazy as a sloth, and everyone would think it'd be cute. I tell my 6-year-old, at some point, these things that kids do that right now are cute and socially acceptable will eventually not be. And it's hard to know exactly at what age, but I know as a 40-year-old man, acting like a sloth in public would be frowned upon. And that's too bad.
You're definitely past the threshold, unfortunately.
Well, especially considering how sleep deprived I am, I just want to sleep for months. I am so ready to just, go back to a normal sleep routine. Yeah, that Chris Jones thing from earlier about running for governor, any idea of running for anything after Election Day 2024, considering how miserable and tired and sleep deprived I am. Like, nothing sounds good in that space right now. But I'll rest, I'll recover, just like after the first cycle, and then we'll see what happens after that.
My question, your description of your appearance maybe ties in well to this, because in that initial Iowa press
that may have been TMI, I'm sorry, I don't know.
No. I mean, you got a lot of humorous attention for your mention that someone had called you, I think, a potato cannibal, because they thought you were from Idaho.
That's right.
And you said something to the effect
Idaho,
of, that was the funniest insult you've received. So I'm just wondering, in the time since, has there been any other insult that
I get so many
been directed at you that you can compare to that one?
Oh, man.
Don't say any slurs on
it's
the
really,
podcast.
It's really, it's really hard to top potato cannibal. I mean, I do look like a potato, first off, and he really did think that I was in Idaho instead of Iowa, so it was pretty amusing. Like,
the cannibal part's kind of curious. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, I mean, it also looks like I eat potatoes. Come on, let's just be real. So I mean, if I look
that's
like
what
a
it means.
potato,
If you're literally like a sentient
yeah,
potato.
I eat plenty of potato products, Gavin, which is not really a surprise. So I still give credit to that guy. I don't know his name, but that to this day, we almost put together a Ray Gun T-shirt. Your potato cannibal candidate, because it rolls off the tongue so nicely. But
did Ray Gun not make a T-shirt of that? I would think they would jump right on something like that.
I think they would if I initiated that. Gosh, I mean, nothing nearly is well. Actually, I was reflecting on this today. For that very reason, the fact that on my first Iowa Press appearance that came up, I was thinking, if they asked that question again, what would I say as far as the names being called? I've got to say, there's been a lot less of that this time around. I was reflecting on that on the drive down. So I'm a big advocate for my trans friends, for my friends in the LGBTQ plus community. My brother is trans. I have a lot of trans friends that I love very dearly. Yeah, well, I spent the entirety of my Democratic Party state convention speech back in 2022 on trans rights, which got a standing ovation. But I had a couple people say that was the best speech of the day, but it lost you votes. You should have done it. And I said, I don't care. I do what I want. Whatever. I had a journalist off the record say that was the best speech he had heard at one of those things. And then he said, "Okay, we're on the record now." And then they proceeded to ask me how I could justify burning bridges between Democrats and Republicans in rural Iowa by doing something like
Wow.
But then I got angry.
Inside
I got
the
really
media,
pissed off, and that story never ran because I spent the next 30 minutes scowling at him and firmly telling him how awful that was. So the story never ran. But okay, sorry, Gavin. To get to your question, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, the reason I say that is because I used to be called groomer a lot, right? I would, I'm very clear in my defense of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm not going to pull any punches on anything that I believe in.
Which means you're going after children. How dare you? Yeah,
so people would call me groomer or those kinds of things. You learn to ignore that. You have to have a really thick skin to do this kind of thing, and but that's really rare these days. Like it's been a long time. I wonder why that is, actually, now that I think of it. Gosh, I need to ponder more on that. But yeah, I get called a lot less names these days than I used to on social media.
Well, I suppose that's good.
I think it might be good. I guess I do kind of wonder if the stances that I've taken that have resonated with Republicans have. Well, I mean, more than I wonder, I know that they've gained me a lot of respect and cachet in Republican circles, like on the carbon capture fight, the not taking corporate PAC money fight, the cancer crisis fight, because I talk about things that politicians on both sides of the aisle are often afraid to talk about. So they see that clearly I'm willing to speak truth to power. So I think over time, as more and more folks have gotten to know me, a lot of Republicans have told me in various ways they respect me, even if they may not vote for me. That may be why. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess the hope is that you've changed them to some degree, and so they'd be less likely to call someone else a groomer in the future.
It would certainly be nice that less people were called a groomer.
Yeah.
That would be a kumbaya moment that we all can aspire to achieve, I guess. But
yeah. Well, we should probably let you get some rest now. Thank you again for
It's
giving
9:30 now? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That
Thank you
just
for
flew by.
giving us a bit of your late night after an already long day.
No, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate what you guys do. And, I think that we need more truth tellers. And I've never had a doubt in my mind that you guys tell the truth as you see it. There are a lot of folks in this space that clearly do not tell the truth as they see it. And we need more truth tellers. So I appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you, Ryan. You can find more about Ryan's campaign at meltonforiowa.com, of course, and he's pretty active on social media, so and he's pretty approachable. So if you want to talk to him yourself, just reach out. I would say. I guess I'm inviting people to do that on your behalf.
I mean, well, keeping in mind I have a full-time job, a wife and 2 kids, and I'm on the road all the time campaigning. But so it is hard to find the time to have the conversations I wish I could have on social media. But if I find a random moment, like I'm on the road and I'm in a hotel room and I actually can open my phone and just focus solely on that. If someone reaches out to me, you may get a reply from me one random day at like 3 a.m. or something. That's the best I can often do, but I try to make every effort. I have not left a single message unanswered. Email, Facebook, Twitter, like DMs. Obviously, you have like trolls on your replies where they clearly don't want to engage in honest conversation. So I obviously ignore those. But
yeah.
But anyway,
yeah. All right. Well, that's been Rock Hard Caucus episode 167. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much, Gavin, for doing better preparation than I did.
I thought Justin's questions were great.
No one else has asked if there's been an attempt on your life before, so I got that one.
I mean, I'm still reeling from that question. Like, I've not had a single journalist. I'm going to call you a journalist. You're a journalist too. Yeah, I've not had a single journalist ask me a question that an hour and a half later has still left me a bit shaken. Like the PTSD from that moment is surging through my veins. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it.
Well, that's more than I can say for any of my questions. So.
That's what we strive for, is lasting trauma.
Yeah, Gavin, you did not awake any guttural fear and depression in me like Justin did. So that doesn't mean you did a bad job.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It just means that you didn't ask, is someone trying to murder me? Like Justin did.
Don't want to pile on too much trauma in one interview, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, I'm going to close the record
consideration
now. Okay, hi. Sorry, the episode's not quite over yet. I hope you enjoyed Gavin and I's interview with congressional candidate Ryan Melton. I'm sorry if you hate Democrats across the board, no matter what, but sometimes they are, politically relevant, and so I felt that an interview might be worth our time. Sorry if you didn't find it worth your time. Why am I being so negative? I'm jumping in here just because I have to plug stuff, and I didn't want to waste Gavin and Ryan's time with the plugs section. God, now I'm wasting your time with the plugs section. So thanks for continuing to listen. If you took issue with anything that was said on the show and you maybe want to weigh in with your own opinion, you can give us a call at 319-849-8733. You can send us an email at rockhardcaucus@gmail.com. If you're really dedicated, you can send us a piece of mail at P.O. Box 5336 in Coralville, Iowa, 52241. All of your correspondence could end up being a part of Rock Hard Call Us, which is our audience engagement series, which is over on our Patreon, a subscription platform, patreon.com/rockhardcaucus. And now more than ever, I really need to plug the Patreon, patreon.com/rockhardcaucus, because I am frankly busting my ass right now. I'm recording stuff nonstop and just producing more content than I've ever produced. And I love it. I love it. I do this for the love of the game, right? But it does take up time and effort. And I do have real jobs where I get paid real money to pay my real bills. And so I am kind of pushing it right now with the amount of time I'm investing in this. But hey, like I said, I love it. But if you want to maybe reward me for my efforts and ensure the continued existence of this project, I would appreciate that. Patreon.com/rockhardcaucus. where you'll get access to Rock Hard Call Us, and you'll get access to Speed Freak Read Speak, where we review Sonic the Hedgehog comics. I know that sounds silly, but it is probably the most fun I ever have podcasting. And we also have been reviewing Slipknot albums with our series Bay Not Me Slippin'. And Evan and I are planning on recording a new one of those on Monday night with a special guest. So look forward to that. All that is on patreon.com/rockhardcaucus. And while I'm talking about content that I'm producing, there's going to be an extra episode, a free episode later this week, because I've been interviewing a lot of political candidates, not just Ryan Melton, but I'm doing shorter phone interviews with other people. And I'm building up so much audio that I'm going to have to release that before next Sunday. So expect some of that later this week. Some more candidate interviews that get a lot stranger than the one you just heard. But outside in the real world, if you're listening to this episode on the day it came out, October 6th, 2024, I would love to see you at a show that I booked tonight, a music show in Iowa City, at Public Space One's Close House, which is a mansion. If you've never been there, it's really fun. It's a cool place where cool events happen, like this one, where the band Sex Funeral, Electro Gong, Angle Grinder, and Sam Lockwood will all be playing. The show starts at 7 tonight, October 6th, Public Space One Close House. I would love to see you there. Yeah, I think that's probably enough plugging for now. I'm dropping so much shit in your feeds right now. You've heard enough of my voice. I'm going to close out with a little bit of music. I was honored to play a little bit of ambient music this week when a good friend of the podcast, Lorelei, came back to town and gave an artist talk on the University of Iowa campus. And I recorded that background music, and I'm going to play a little bit of that for you now. I think it's pleasant thing to go out on. All right. Thanks again for listening, and keep on listening. Please, I beg of you.
you